We're live.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Ira Scott, and on behalf of retired Police Chief Gordon L. Weiborg Jr., who is also editor-in-chief for Priorities, I would like to thank you for joining our virtual press conference, occasioned by launch of the news site titled Priorities. We anticipate that you learned of our conference from the related media alert, which sets out the who, what, and why we're here. So in the interest of time, we won't repeat any of that unless we need to in response to your questions. Please reserve your questions until after our presentation, which should take no more than 15 minutes. Everyone associated with Priorities is a good government advocate focused on one or more aspects of America's legal system. Gordon Weiborg is Executive Committee Board President of Priorities' nonprofit corporate sponsor known as the Law Project. The Law Project champions America's legal system, which is undoubtedly the greatest in the world. But we hold no punches in combating misconduct and corruption that can literally transform the legal system into a weapon of mass destruction. It is pretty apparent that most, if not all, of this legal system abuse violates criminal law, not to mention civil, constitutional, and human rights. Yet in our nation that imprisons more people than any country on earth, it is virtually impossible for average Americans to ask for and receive a thorough government investigation of even rather blatant and deadly serious prosecutor or judicial misconduct. We are apparently tough on crime, except when we are not. Priorities will address law enforcement as well as private lawyer accountability. Our debut edition includes a commentary of mine, or of rather Gordon Weiborg, on the folly of law enforcement self-investigation. But there is nothing more potent than corruption that has the backing of U.S. prosecutors and judges. I now proudly introduce to you Priorities Editor-at-Large, Dr. Zena Crenshaw-Logal.
Well, thank you, Mr. Scott, and good morning, everyone. I thank you for joining our virtual press conference. We had anticipated that Chief Weiborg would be joining us. He had a mishap of a fall this morning, so we wish him a speedy recovery and know that he's with us in spirit. Let me start by acknowledging I'm going to really tell my age by saying I'm old enough to have heard the TV series that closed each episode by saying that there are 8 million stories in the Naked City. This has been one of them. Now, you know that goes way back, or some of you may have no idea about that TV series because it goes so far back. But let me move on by saying Priorities, our new online news and muse site, was created. It wasn't created to share stories of U.S. legal system abuse per se. It was created we will share those stories to the extent that they demonstrate the kind of conduct by lawyers and judges that U.S. law enforcement officers, prosecutors, and legislators have consistently refused to acknowledge, let alone investigate or prosecute. Now, we won't be going for those gray areas where reasonable minds may differ on who did what or who was right or who was wrong. Instead, we're going to lay out objectively established facts to prove, now get this, we're going to be proving that a thorough government investigation is more than warranted. So this is not trial by street trial. This is not about getting down to ultimate questions of who's at fault, who's responsible, who's culpable. Instead, our goal is to establish that the case at question deserves a thorough, emphasis on thorough, government investigation. the importance of government investigation, it can't be overemphasized, because what we are able to do as average Americans, our private citizens, I should say, as compared to what a government can accomplish, a government agency can accomplish through their investigation is quite different. So we need to have the power of the state, the power of federal government to go in and create a situation that people are compelled to answer thoroughly, can suffer some penalties if they are not forthcoming with the information that they provide. We just simply don't have that capacity as private citizens. That's presuming we have access to things like subpoenas, the civil discovery process. If any of you all are aware of that, that's when you're allowed to send people involved in litigation questions, ask for documents, and that your right to engage in thorough civil discovery or private discovery can be limited by the judge involved. So it's important to have this thorough government investigation. What we want to do, in fact, if we're doing our jobs, tax-paying Americans should be insulted by the lack of thorough investigation in the cases that we feature. That's when we know we're being effective. Even if the case doesn't involve you, doesn't impact your interests, as a tax-paying American, you should be insulted that we can't get a thorough government investigation. That's what will happen if we're doing our job effectively at our priorities. Already our debut edition is addressing the extent to which Americans are entitled to certain government investigations we may request. It's important for us to be aware of what we are entitled to. So that helps us gauge just how much outrage we should have about what we're entitled to being denied. We'll also be featuring grassroots efforts to secure those investigations. That's very important. And I have to say that there will be no holes barred in identifying obstacles to these appropriate investigations. We've already called out in our debut edition, we've already called out Black, Brown, and Blue Lives Matter advocates. We call them out for watching U.S. law enforcement officers, one after another, get crucified for exposing misconduct and corruption in their departments. So if you're challenging what you contend is police brutality or excessive force, over militarization of our law enforcement in this country, lack of accountability. Yet when you have people on the inside of this law enforcement field risking everything, losing their career, bringing a tremendous instability in their lives, trying to expose this very conduct that you're against, we're calling you out for not supporting these brave heroes, these heroes of justice. And we're going to keep pushing that envelope offline through one-on-one outreach. We're going to be going to these advocates of Black and Brown lives and Blue lives, the law enforcement advocates. We're going to be reaching out to them, and we're going to be having community meetings and asking, okay, you know, what's going on? Why aren't you standing up for the people who are risking everything to make sure that law enforcement functions lawfully and properly and effectively? One of our debut articles has already questioned just how could a community let a law enforcement officer go down. His career, he lost his career, and this was a deputy sheriff who fought zealously to protect children from sexual predators. And he was prosecuted for supposedly assaulting an alleged pedophile. Barely anyone pays attention to these law enforcement whistleblowers, no matter how much we demonstrate, and I've been a part of this advocacy, no matter how much we demonstrate the flaws in the charges that have been brought against them, arguably and pretty apparently in retaliation for their whistleblowing. So just expect that a question will be posing to the public, to public officials, to activists, business and religious leaders, as well as the general public. We're going to be asking all of you, whose side are you on, based on how you're responding to these cases and the lack of responsiveness of our government, the failure of our government, whether it's the FBI, a local police department, prosecutor's office, Department of Justice, state prosecutor. We're going to be asking, whose sides are you on when we have these compelling facts that suggest wrongdoing has been done, but nobody is bothering to acknowledge these cases. Nobody is bothering to question the lack of investigation. We're going to be asking just whose side are you on? And posing that question will be experts on America's law enforcement, legal, and political systems. My fellow co-writers include retired Judge Paul L. Nally, one of America's foremost experts on grand juries, access to private citizen access to grand juries, a recent candidate for governor in the state of Georgia, the great state of Georgia, which I'm now a part of. Mr. Ted Metz is one of our writers. Chief Weiborg, who is, of course, a criminal law enforcement scholar. So he's lived both sides of it, the academic part of criminal law enforcement, as well as he's functioned in the role of a police chief of a pretty substantial police department, law enforcement department. So we're going to be having the experts leading the charge and putting everybody to, in the spotlight and saying, okay, what are you doing about that? So again, thank you so much for joining this press conference. Our next speaker was supposed to be a fellow board member, Mr. Brian Kenter, and he had a very demanding court appearance yesterday, and apparently has not been able to join us. No, he may be on the line. Let me see. What I'll do is I'll unmute everyone, and I'll see if Mr. Kenter is on the line. We'll have some remarks. But before I do that, I want to emphasize that the person who spoke initially, Mr. Ira Scott, is one of my fellow board members. We're both on the National Strategy and Management Board, and he filled in for Chief Weiborg at the last minute. So thank you very much, and a big round of applause for him for filling in so quickly and not requiring all of you to hear me drawn on any more than you have had to already. So thank you so much, Mr. Scott. Now I'm going to unmute everyone, and now, Mr. Kenter, are you in the audience? Okay, good afternoon. I'd like to apologize to Mr. Brian Kenter for our technical difficulties that didn't allow us to get his statement during our live press conference, our online press conference on Friday, but fortunately we are able to have him here today, and we look forward to your comments. So take it away, Mr. Kenter.
Yes, I'm Brian Kenter. I am the president and founder of the JAM, the Judicial Accountability Movement. I'm the first vice president on the National Strategy and Management Board. One of the reasons why that we are in support of what Zena Crenshaw and the NSMB board is trying to accomplish, along with the Voyager Project and a lot of other different groups, is the fact that our legal system, it needs to be brought into check. There is no checks and balance on the judiciary, and while we can say hypothetically that we all have a remedy of redress for our grievances, that is an inaccurate statement. Now, the application for the implementation of getting that is a lesson in futility, because you're going back to the court requesting for the court to give you relief when it is the court itself is the ones that are doing the oppressing. They're the ones that are putting people in situations with no oversight, no accountability. Their decisions are final, unless you take it up on appeal, and then you can go on up. But one of the biggest factors in the whole equation is the element of time and economics. And a lot of times is that people don't have either one. They don't have the economics and they don't have the time. But at the same point in time is that one has, that such as myself, that has transversed to the U.S. Supreme Court on a number of occasions, whereas the U.S. Supreme Court on July 13, 2013, initiated Rule 28.8 that says no pro se litigant can take their case before the U.S. Supreme Court. I find that repugnant to the Constitution. I find that an absolute outrage that you have to be a card-holding member of the bar before you can get any relief. One of the things that Dr. Crenshaw has done and is doing is the attempt is that we've all been to our senators, our congressmen, our state representatives, and we're asking them to bring us a relief, but they really have no power over the judiciary. You know, the judiciary is an unbridled force. And one of the things that we're hopeful to accomplish with joining up with Dr. Zena Crenshaw in going forward with the to the United Nations is just how dismal our situation is. I mean, the American people are in dire straits trying to get a remedy of relief, knowing that when they go to the court, imagine, if you will, you're accusing a judge or a courthouse of wrongdoing, and then you're going to the very people that employ those people or are superior to those people that don't want to hold their own accountable. And then it happens in probate court, it happens in juvenile court, domestic relations courts, any type of court that there is. The court system, we believe now, is ran more in tune with a racketeering organization, whereas there is selective enforcement of the laws rather than compliance to the laws. So we believe that every single person has to be accountable, and that includes our judges and our judiciary. And we believe that watching what Leon Kozol has done, John Gentry has done, Chris Hallett, what Michelle McDonald has done, what Connie Reguli has done, and so many across the nation, going to the very same system that's keeping you in oppression, asking, begging, pleading for a remedy or relief, and it falls on deaf ears. You know, I just received a call the other day where a fellow had filed and they put him on the docket for in 2020, June of 2020. And you're sitting and I'm saying, how do you go 15 months when as the court system has taken something from you and there's no remedy for you to get any relief because of it?
Well, we appreciate your input, and I see you had a choir in the background, and we appreciate their input as well. So thank you, and this is the beginning. So we look forward to working with all these people that you named across the country for relief.
Thank you, and I apologize for the audience.
Thank you. Okay, good morning. This is a continuation of our press conference, and here we have Mr. Maurice Morris, a former deputy sheriff in Ohio. His case is one that I follow closely, and it's a subject of two of our writings in the debut edition of Priority. So we're very happy that you joined us today, Mr. Morris, and we welcome you to give some brief comments to our audience. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Xenia. I do appreciate this opportunity just to tell you a little bit about my particular situation and where things kind of stand today. As you alluded to earlier, I am a former deputy sheriff in Toledo, Ohio, and also a former minister. As my servant to the people of Lucas County and a servant of God, I believe that it was important and imperative that I protect our kids from predatory behavior. I'm from a church where 4 different individuals were convicted of sexual inappropriate behavior on a minor child. My situation just happened to be the 5th. I brought the information to the sheriff, and the sheriff, being the chief law enforcement officer in the county and the city, chose to do nothing but requested that I filed a police report with Toledo Police Department. As it stands now, there are 3 former pastors in this area indicted on federal charges for child sex trafficking, something that I was trying to prevent then. And just recently, one pastor was found guilty on 3 charges of sex trafficking of a 14-year-old girl. That information, the indictment, all can be found online. And, since the pastors, got indicted, certain people in the community started to reach out and ask, what did I know then? And, what am I going to do now? And my question to them was, what are you going to do?
Good.
How do we protect our kids? How do we circle the wagon? Because this is not an isolated incident. This is not an isolated situation. And I don't understand, why is it when our kids come under attack that we as parents, community leaders, religious leaders don't come to the forefront to protect our kids?
And on that note, we'll let that be what our presentation for the purposes of this press conference. It may be difficult for people to follow the connection between your whistleblowing and your passion for dealing with child predators, particularly in the context of church. I want to try to explain that just a bit for the press conference, because we're not we're here on the occasion of the launch of priorities, so we're not going to get totally into the detail of the cases that we feature. But
Okay.
our theory, as you know, is that you were part of addressing allegations of union manipulation on the part of your former boss. And I understand he was eventually indicted on unrelated matters. Is that correct?
That is correct. Him and a officer from the IA department, and then a sergeant and a deputy was indicted on murder of a inmate.
Okay.
The sheriff,
Okay.
and the IA officer were found not guilty, but the other 2 were found guilty.
Okay. Well, so what our theory is that your whistleblowing with regard to the alleged union election manipulation was really the straw that broke the camel's back. And so that your boss basically allowed you to be put in a position where you were accused by an alleged church pedophile of assaulting him during the course of an arrest that you weren't leading that effort. You were just on the scene, and you of course denied that. But the community and the church community, several church leaders embraced the fact that your department was willing to allow you to be portrayed as someone who was, instead of a rights defender, was violating someone's rights. And they actually took this theory to trial, to a jury trial. It was totally inconsistent with your sheriff conduct record, your law enforcement conduct record, everything about your morals and how you had proceeded in the past. But a jury bought it, and the community was a part of painting you in the way that suggests that you would go out and deliberately assault a civilian. And the point that we try to make in our article, and then I'll end on this and move on for purposes of the press conference, is that when you're a law enforcement whistleblower, they talk about the problem getting law enforcement accountability, and that even when we have video evidence that to us civilians seem to suggest excessive force, improper conduct, there's not criminal culpability. But when you are a whistleblower, even these weak, arguably laughable, to a lot of people, laughable cases stick. You actually get investigated, you get prosecuted, and you get convicted. And that is problematic. And the community needs to step up and stop watching our heroes, which Mr. Morris is very much one of them, be sacrificed when we say that we're concerned about our children and we're concerned about justice. So thank you, Mr. Morris, for joining us. I'm going to move on. We have some questions or comments from Marty Oakley, who is a well-known media personality and host and investigative reporter among U.S. legal system reform advocates. So we're going to hear from her briefly and wrap up this press conference. Thank you so much for participating. Okay, Ms. Oakley, you're joining us by phone. Go ahead and introduce yourself a bit and share with us your questions or comments.
Okay, I host and produce and own TS Radio Network on Blog Talk. Been on there 11 years now. I run the PPJ Gazette website, and which we have a tremendous number of subscribers to that. My concern is that it seems everything from federal to state government down has fallen apart to such a degree, has become so corrupt. What Mr. Morris endured there, this is standard fare. They'll hang anybody out to dry. They will mount all kinds of false cases against people to keep this system running the way it is. We are being bought, sold, and traded. We are commodities. We have been commodified. Zena, you brought up early about we have the most people in prison in this country than any country in the world. We actually have more people in prison than any other three Western governments do, or actually anybody in the world. We have turned prison into profit making. We're selling prisoner bonds on Wall Street. We are incarcerating people for the most stupid of reasons. And this is costing taxpayers money, which all goes into corrections corporations or someplace else, some corporate pocket. We're paying for all of this. But what we're paying for is the trafficking of human beings.
But try to get any of that, what you're talking about, investigated or prosecuted. Right. And what happens then from your experience, Ms. Oakley?
Nothing. Nothing. You can go to them with dragging the body, so to speak. And like I said, I've contacted all these federal and state agencies regarding guardianship and the abuse of that system, the theft of estates. We have mountains, and I mean mountains of documented court evidence of what is happening. And all you get, and I don't care what your topic is, I don't care who you are contacting or what you are needing from them, there are all these committees, there are these study groups, there are hearings, there is all this waste of time and money, and these people intend to do not a thing.
And that's for the very few areas of law that you can get even that type of
yes.
show investigation. And tell us a bit about that area where you can get hearings and studies.
Well, what happens is, because they've set up what they call the probate system. Now, probate is supposed to become active only upon presentation of the death certificate. The guardianship petition is the de facto death certificate. You have been declared dead in the law, and as such, you cannot speak. You have no constitutional rights or protections. These are tribunals in the truest sense, and I've seen them.
And those are senior guardianship,
yes,
adult guardianships,
and many times disabled people,
okay.
People who have suffered serious injury and have a big insurance settlement. They get guardianized and they get robbed, and eventually they are taken out. And
those cases, there is a government response. There is at least some semblance of concern on the part of government.
No, absolutely not. There again, these are
they have the commissions and things like that.
Yes, but okay. they're dysfunctional, non-functional. Okay. Let me put it that way. Okay. They intend not to change the system. You're talking many times, Zena, to the same people that facilitated the system being put in place.
Okay, well, I understand what you're saying. Okay, well, on that note, we're going to close out. And because we have one other presenter that we're going to bring on, and so to stay true to our time commitment, I appreciate so much the both of you participating, and this won't be the last of us coming together and addressing these very serious issues. Thank you so much.